Welcome back to Living Grounded. You're here with Lila and Tim.
Hello.
We're currently walking through the highlights of the Bible together. And last week we began 1 Kings. Are we gonna finish that today?
Yeah, we'll finish 1 Kings today. Yep. It's crazy how quickly the world can change. I'm old enough to remember black and white TVs.
Oh my goodness.
Yep, I can picture one in my house. Let alone a world with, before we had smartphones and social media and all these things. One potential reason, or I'm persuaded by this, one of the reasons people are experiencing so much anxiety in our time is because of so much change, so much fast change. And 1 Kings is a bit like that. Under Solomon, Israel becomes a powerhouse. The end of chapter 10 says that the king, so Solomon, yeah, that's right, he made silver as common in Jerusalem as stone. So it's wealthy, right? Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. He accumulated chariots and horses, thousands of them.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. He's accumulating other things too, though. Wives.
Ooh.
Chapter 11, the writer says, King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines.
That's quite a lot.
Now, just a note on that. Polygamy, having multiple wives, was really common for the kings of Israel, just as it was actually really common for the nations in the ancient world. That doesn't mean the Bible affirms it. Okay? Just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean that God or the Bible or the writers are saying that's okay. In fact, most of the time, it's shown that having more than one wife is problematic. It will cause problems. You think of Sarah and Hagar, for instance, or Rachel and Leah. Like it usually causes issues, as you can imagine, I think. And eventually it's a cause for sin. Here, it's not just the number of wives that's the issue, it's the nature of those wives. Solomon's wives are from nations that don't believe in God. And we're told as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. They influenced him, they moved him, they kept worshipping their own gods, and eventually Solomon devoted himself to their gods too. He followed Ashtoreth and Molech, they're kind of Canaanite gods. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He started building what were called high places. So they're kind of like mini temples or altars, places of worship to these other gods.
Didn't he build God's temple too?
Yeah, so he's gone and built God's temple. Now he builds these other places to these other gods. Now you remember what God said, right? You remember what he said to David. You remember what he said to Solomon. Follow my commands and decrees. Stand firm in your love and obedience of me, and I'll bless you in the nation of Israel. But now Solomon's broken covenant. His heart has turned against God. And God has done nothing to deserve. What has Solomon received from God? Wisdom and wealth and power and strength, all the things. God has been incredibly faithful to his promise, but Solomon has not been faithful to his. His heart has been turned because he's gone after forbidden fruit.
Didn't he get wisdom from God?
And he's shown that even the wisest man in the world can also be, with sin, can also be incredibly foolish. He chose immediate pleasure over faithfulness and blessing, and so God's anger burns against Solomon. Solomon has broken covenant. Now God will do what he promised to covenant breakers. He will remove his blessing from Solomon and from Israel. Now see something there. We find this quite alien, but this is how the world works. Just because Solomon breaks covenant, does that mean that individual Israelites should suffer? There seems something kind of wrong with that. But think about this: if our Prime Minister was to make a bad decision, if he was to declare war on another country, who would that ultimately affect? It would affect his legacy, but guess who's dying in the trenches? It's
Definitely
the people.
his people.
That's right. And that's even, if that's true of a democracy like Australia, how much more true of a king? Israel had wanted a king back in 1 Samuel, you remember. This is the consequences of having a king. They represent you. But for the sake of King David, God says, for the sake of the promises that he made to David about the line of David, God says, I'm not going to take the kingdom off Solomon. But I will take it off his children. That will be a different story. The line of David will not remain through Solomon. And what follows is the decline into chaos. It starts with a guy called Jeroboam. He's one of Solomon's officials. He begins a rebellion. It doesn't initially succeed. Jeroboam escapes to Egypt, but he's waiting. And after Solomon's death, Rehoboam, the names are going to get a little bit like this. Rehoboam, he's the son of Solomon, succeeds him. So there is still one of Solomon's children on the throne. But he turns out to be a really foolish king. Jeroboam, who was waiting in Egypt, he comes back. He kind of puts Rehoboam to the test. What sort of king will he be? Turns out he's a terrible one. Rehoboam listens to bad advice. He treats the people of Israel like slaves. And that leads to rebellion led by Jeroboam. And this time Jeroboam is successful. Israel is actually split in two.
Wow.
The north made up of 10 tribes. They'll usually now be called Israel. So from now on, you need to remember this, from now on when we use the language of Israel, the Bible will mean the northern tribes. Generally speaking, will mean the northern tribes. And the southern tribes will be called Judah. It's actually Judah and Benjamin, but Benjamin's so small that it eventually just becomes sucked up into Judah. So Jeroboam in the north sets up a rival kingdom and a rival temple. He proclaims even a rival Exodus.
Oh, wow.
And he then goes and makes 2 golden calves.
Have we heard that story before?
We've heard that story. So see the symbolism. It's a picture that what's happening here is twice as evil as what happened in Exodus, back in Exodus in the original golden calf episode. So from this point, the kings of Israel in the north, eventually there'll be 19 of them, will do what is evil in the eyes of the Lord. In 2 kings, that's eventually going to lead to the destruction of Israel in the north. In Judah down south, things are a bit more of a roller coaster. You'll get some good kings. You'll get some bad kings. Eventually, Judah's sins will become too great for God to allow them to remain also. That'll be a bit further down the line. But 1 Kings finishes in this kind of sad futility. It's this fascinating thing. People today read 1 Kings, Christians today read 1 Kings and go, whoa, if only this sort of stuff had happened. But the stuff that happens that God does through a prophet called Elijah falls essentially on deaf ears. Despite seeing some of the most incredible miracles, God's people don't turn back to God. Elijah, he's God's prophet during the kingship of a particular evil, it becomes a renowned rule of Ahab and his wife Jezebel. You might have heard of Jezebel. She's kind of becomes archetypal for an adulterous woman, a woman who steers people away from God. Israel has turned to the worship of the Baals. That's the god of the Canaanites. Particularly awful religion. Includes human sacrifice, human blood, so power in blood, bloodletting as a way to kind of access Baal's power. Elijah eventually puts a challenge to Ahab. He says, get all the prophets of Baal and bring them to a contest. Meet me at Mount Carmel. It's kind of epic moment. There's Elijah. He's the lone prophet of God, and he says, let's present 2 bulls to be prepared on altars. One on my God's altar, the God of the Bible, the God of Israel, Yahweh, and one on the God of the Baals and the Baals' God. And you call on your gods to consume that sacrifice, that bull, in fire. Should be able to do that. I'll do the same with mine. Whichever God answers the call, that's the true God. This is like a stadium moment for Israel. Israel is gathering to watch in a sense. Now, the prophets of Baal, they cry out to Baal, they slash themselves with knives, all the things that they do to kind of get him to listen to them. But despite all 450 or whatever, blood everywhere and shouting out to Baal, there is no answer. Elijah, on the other hand, he arranges his altar with the bull. He orders that water be poured all over the firewood under the bull. 3 times he does this just to make sure that the firewood is totally soaked.
So impossible.
The spontaneous combustion is not possible here. He calls on Yahweh, the true God, the God of the Bible, and the fire of the Lord falls from heaven onto the wood, onto the sacrifice, even burning up the stone of the altar. The people of Israel, for a moment, turn on the prophets of Baal. It doesn't turn out well for them. But despite this great exhibition of power, Ahab, the king, Jezebel, Israel continue to do what is evil.
Okay, lots going on in here. So how do we get to Jesus from there?
Well, of course, and we've done this a few times, so I won't spend long on it, but Jesus is such a different king to the kings of Israel. He is always faithful to his promises. He is always good. He never does what is evil. He is the king you want. Mm-hmm. He's the king you want representing you before God, because he doesn't break covenant. He's not going to lead you astray. He's not going to do something foolish on your behalf. There's a theological concept here called headship. We saw it a little while earlier. The king represents the nation. If the king turns away from God, it's like the nation has turned away from God. What happens to the king happens to the nation. In Romans, Paul describes Adam, the original Adam, as in those sort of terms. So everyone who is descended from Adam is under Adam's headship. They inherit Adam's sin. Because Adam led us into sin, we all have been led into sin and the breaking of that first covenant with God in many ways. And so we all suffer the consequences of sin. But the wonderful thing that God's done in Jesus is, in the same way, everyone who follows Jesus has come under his headship. We've been united to Christ by trusting in his death and resurrection. And therefore, we're transferred from having Adam as our head, under death in Adam, to life in Christ. Mm-hmm. Jesus is now our head, which matters because, Jesus represents us before the Father. And of course, Jesus never broke covenant. He fulfilled the covenant perfectly. And therefore, he receives all the rewards of the covenant, which he now shares with those who are in him, under him. Mm-hmm. And so we reap the benefits. Instead of the consequences of Adam, we reap the benefits of Christ. We receive what the king has earned, and that is, of course, eternal life and all its blessings. Now, one more thing, though. Let me take you back to Solomon and his wives. You remember Jesus, of course, has no wife.
Nope.
Forget the Da Vinci Code. If you've read that, watch that. Mary Magdalene business is nonsense. Jesus had no wife. Or did he? Actually, Christ does have a bride.
Really?
A spiritual one anyway, and it's the church. All of God's people are collectively called the bride of Christ. Again, we're a collective here. We are his beloved. Now, sorry, blokes. Sorry, I shouldn't have looked at you like that. Sorry, blokes. I know that's a bit of a mind bend that we're the bride of Christ. We're married to Jesus in some sense. But capture this. The picture is, it's all metaphorical, okay? It's that it's Jesus looks at his church, looks at his people the way that a husband looks at his bride on the day of their wedding. That's how Jesus sees the church. That's how Jesus thinks of the church. He loves her wholeheartedly. Unlike Solomon, whose heart is turned away from the one true God to foreign and false gods by his wives, Jesus actually does the opposite. He turns the heart of his wife towards God, the heart of his bride towards God. But of course, this reminds us, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's the bit where it's about how does this help us living grounded today?
Yeah. Paul warns Christians in 2 Corinthians 6 verse 14, do not be yoked with unbelievers. What does righteousness and wickedness have in common? What fellowship can light have with darkness? You might have heard before, particularly if you're new to the Bible or Christianity, you might have heard that Christians don't marry non-Christians, or they do sometimes, but they shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And it's because of things like the example of Solomon. Intimate relationships, marriages, the sharing of life like that is a powerful thing. It affects us deeply. And experience shows this to be true, that many a Christian who has made the choice to marry someone who isn't a Christian has eventually had their heart turned away from God. And that doesn't need to be some kind of nefarious, deliberate part on the non-Christian partner. It's just a natural thing that happens. Following Jesus is really hard, as it is.
Life is really hard.
Life is really hard. Following Jesus is really hard. You've got a whole world that doesn't really want you to follow Jesus, as it is. It's hard enough when you're partnered, when you're married to someone who is a believer. It's hard enough. But when they're not a believer, someone who isn't praying for you, someone who isn't urging you to fight your sins, someone who isn't urging you to always do what is godly. Now, they might a bit. I want to be fair. I know some of these situations where the non-Christian partner is somewhat encouraging, but it will never be the same, not in the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is a call to be wise single Christians, to not compromise, to remember Solomon. It's an encouragement to be wise Christian people who are married. Keep turning each other to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you are in that situation where, for whatever reason, maybe even before you became a Christian, you are married to someone who isn't. That's okay. Paul gives some instruction on this. It doesn't necessarily mean you should get divorced or anything like that. It does mean it will be hard, and you will need to cling to God's people and people who encourage you and strengthen you even more. So I pray that would be true for you.
Mm-hmm. What about someone who's maybe dating or considering dating someone who's not a Christian? You're in love. Seems hard to be like, but
Yeah. Look, sadly, I've counseled many people, many young people, particularly in that situation. And it's so hard, right? Those feelings are so strong. You have these thoughts as well that, well, if I kind of broke up with them now, they would hate God. They would never turn to God. I encourage you, particularly with that piece, because that's generally where our heads go. I love them and I would hate for them to hate God because I break up with them for this reason. I encourage you to just trust God in that. There, nowhere in the Bible we encouraged, or is the suggestion that it is worth continuing in sin for the sake of someone to believe.
Mm-hmm.
No, our job is to trust God that by doing what is godly and true and godly and right, that God may still work through that. Now, that's I'm not promising you that it'll all end up okay. I've seen situations where the person did react really angrily and was like, I can't believe you're breaking up with me because of God. These things can happen, but what I can guarantee you is God is most glorified by you doing what is right, what he's told you to do, than to continue doing something that he said is unwise for the sake of worrying about what will happen to the other person. What I can tell you is, and this is the mistake, you think that the best way for them to hear about Jesus is to stay in the relationship. Generally speaking, I've found it's not. Generally, they actually will start to imagine that your Christianity is kind of not as real as you think it is because you're compromising.
Yeah.
And they will also think, well, why do I need to? Because we're together anyway, so it's all working. Generally speaking, you will be the one that loses out.
Yeah, and I've actually seen it go for the good way, and someone started wrestling with like, they do take their faith seriously, and then their heart got turned towards God. But yeah, keep wrestling with that. I remember when we went through that at Bible school, it made a big impact on me. And there's so much even in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So next week, let's continue with 2 Kings, right?
Sounds good.
Great. Yep. See you there.
Ciao.
Ciao.